This is Chi for Yourself. John's guest today is Linda Graham, author of Resilience.
I'm sure you know what it's like to be really blindsided by something that happens in your life, something like the death of someone close to you, a trip to the doctor that ends with bad news, or the loss of your job. Now, you may be going through something like that right now. You feel as though life has knocked you off your pins, and it's a real test of your resilience. Well, our guest today literally wrote the book on resilience. Linda Graham is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the author of Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and even Disaster. And I'm happy to have her with us today. Linda, we usually think of resilience as meeting tough times with a tough attitude, strong will, stiff upper lip, as the Brits might say, but your book gives us a very different approach. What are we saying when we use the word resilience?
Well, resilience usually is thought of as the capacity to bounce back from adversity, from challenges and crises, from the external stressors that we have to face in our lives. But resilience is an inner quality. It's innate in our being because it's innate in our brain. So more than a trait that we inherit genetically, like grit or determination or perseverance, the behavioral scientists, the neuroscientists now are seeing resilience as the capacity of response flexibility to be able to perceive what's happening but shift our responses to it, so that we can be more skillful, more adaptive, more flexible in how we choose to respond. And because we're hardwired in our body brain to respond to stress, to distress, to disappointment, difficulty, and even a disaster, our body is automatically hardwired. We'll rev up, we'll shut down or flee in order to regulate our normal responses, to regulate anger or fear or sadness or shame as it comes up. We can learn tools that will strengthen the capacities of resilience in the brain. It's one of the functions of the prefrontal cortex, which I call the CEO of resilience. Most people call it the center of executive functioning. But when we can strengthen the capacities of that part of our brain to perceive and choose how to respond, then we can be more resilient. So resilience really, it does depend to some extent on the severity of the external stressor. In other words, it's easier to be resilient if we have a fender bender than if we have a car accident that causes an injury, than if we cause the death of a child in a car accident. The severity of the external stressor does make a difference. But our internal response is what can make even more of a difference. And that's why some people can bounce back from something fairly easily that would be potentially traumatizing to another person, or even bounce back pretty quickly to something now in our life that previously might have caused us to tip into overwhelm or a trauma. So resilience really is this capacity to face and deal with whatever we have to face and deal with skill and with flexibility. At least that's how I'm presenting it in Resilience.
Mm-hmm. I can remember, it was a lot of years ago, when a neighbor came over to our house and she was wailing about something or other. I couldn't make out exactly what it was. And she seemed like she was really in distress. And later on, after she left, I asked my parents, well, what was it that was really getting to her? And they said it was the yield in her garden. And I thought, wow, that doesn't seem to be something that would bring so much emotion. And yet when I compare that to, let's say, the people who lost everything in the fires in California, so many of them were so graceful and lucid in their explanation and just how they were handling it. What is it? You used the word hardwired before. Are we just that different? Is there that large a scale as to how we react to these things?
So the capacities to be resilient are built in to the brain. We all have that. But depending on how we grew up, what role models we had, were there traumas early on in childhood that would compromise the capacity of developing resilience? We develop resilience from experience. And depending on what our experiences are, if they were optimal or if they were difficult, but we were given the external support we needed from family and friends to cope with them, depending on whether we met challenges with resilience and thus learned how to do it, learned that we are resilient, and depending on how many stressors we're having to cope with all at once. I talk about resilience being able to, I talk about these exercises being able to meet any level of disruption to our resilience, from barely a wobble to the serious struggles and sorrows that break our hearts that you were mentioning earlier, to the trauma of too much. And sometimes too many difficult things happen all at once. And even if we could be resilient to meeting any single one of them, we can get overwhelmed by the accumulation. So I prefer, actually, what I encourage people to do is to develop these capacities of resilience ahead of time, to really kind of practice and rehearse and pre-wire the brain, so that when something difficult happens, we already have habits, we already have tools that we can draw on. It's also important to develop a community of support, a safety net of support, people that we can go to in an emergency or when times are hard, so that when something really challenging happens, that safety net is already in place. So part of being resilient is not just being born that way, but choosing to develop the skills and choosing to have the experiences that will develop those skills, so that we're cultivating our resilience ahead of time, just like we can practice cultivating gratitude or cultivating generosity or cultivating kindness. We can cultivate our capacities of resilience. And that's really what I'm encouraging people to do, to make those choices that would allow us to be ready, more prepared, more resourced for whatever might happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, since there is an element of this that is learned, what would you say to parents, let's say, as a bit of encouragement, something to get their children off on a good start in handling things and having more resilience?
Mm-hmm. So if parents can model for their children the practice of meeting any setback, any failure, any mistake as an opportunity to learn and grow. In other words, we're not bad or wrong for failing or making a mistake, but it's an opportunity to learn and to grow. So when parents can help cultivate in their children a growth mindset, whatever happens, we'll figure out how to deal with it. With that kind of encouragement from parents, then children begin to learn that they can, as the Japanese proverb says, fall down 7 times but get up 8. They learn that they can keep trying, keep persevering, and eventually something is going to work out. So it's that attitude of a growth mindset. If parents can model that and cultivate that in their children, then the children are much more likely to grow up to be resilient.
Pressures build in our workaday world, including the possibility, as I said earlier, that our job will disappear. What would you suggest to someone whose resilience now is being tested by that kind of pressure in the workplace?
Right. So, of course, one of the hard things that happens when people lose a job is questioning their competence, their ability to get another job. And one thing I would suggest is the research shows that when we can cultivate a sense of competence at anything, then we can translate that and begin to feel confident that we can be competent at the next thing, even if we've never done it before. And it doesn't matter how small that sense of competence is, as long as we can really own it within ourselves. Sure, I can do this. So when someone loses a job and they're going to be required perhaps to learn new skills or meet new people or even do different tasks, this sense of, well, I've learned before, I've done it before, I've been good at something before, can translate to the new opportunity. And of course, that's part of it, is to see everything as an opportunity, even if we call it an ASCO, another frickin' growth opportunity, but to be able to see those possibilities. One of the traits of resilience is a kind of realistic optimism, to know what's going on, but to be able to maintain a kind of optimism or sense of possibility about it. And so I would suggest to people facing that loss of a job, it's hard when you're facing uncertainty. In the body will go off a signal anxiety. Anytime we're facing something new or unknown or uncertain, it doesn't even have to be a disaster. So to be able to manage our own internal experience and keep the focus on cultivating that openness, that receptivity, that optimism, and then of course, pulling on all kinds of people as resources to help us believe in ourselves, not just to give us advice and counsel, but to help us believe in ourselves and in the process that we're going through.
How do you feel about applying, let's say, affirmations and meditation and things like that in these situations? How do you feel about that as an effective way to deal?
Well, it's very possible and very useful to use positive affirmations, positive experiences, positive emotional memories to rewire something that's negative. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the best uses we could make of affirmations is to take some negative self-talk or some negative belief that we have about ourselves and pair it with the opposite positive thought or belief about ourselves. And what I teach is to be able to say the positive many, many times until it feels kind of realistic and comfortable, and then pair it with something negative because you're wanting to rewire the old negative self-talk that could derail your resilience. So anytime you say the negative, you say the positive. You experience the negative, you experience the positive, so that they're paired. And then the next time that the negative self-talk comes up in the mind, the positive affirmation should automatically come up too. They've been paired in the neural circuitry. So we use that to be able to counter and rewire the old negative messages that might derail the resilience. So that's how I would use affirmations, not simply as a positive resource, but as an actual resource that rewires the negative. That's where the power of it is.
Something you said in the book reminded me of that woman I used in the example earlier, that the human brain has a negativity bias. How does that happen, and what can we do about that?
Okay, so again, the negativity bias, hardwired in by evolution, this is our biology. We will pay more attention to an experience that's negative or unpleasant or dangerous than we pay attention to something that is positive or pleasant or safe. And that is so we survive as an individual and as a species. So we're never not going to have that negativity bias. What can help counter that is very intentionally, deliberately cultivating positive emotion practices like kindness, compassion, gratitude, joy, awe, delight, serenity, any of those kind of emotions, and we intentionally cultivate them. When we experience any of those positive emotions, it shifts the functioning of the brain. That's what it does. It's not just feeling better. It shifts the functioning of the brain out of contraction, out of reactivity, out of the negativity bias, into a perspective that is larger. We get to see the bigger picture again. We get to see the forest as well as the tree. And when we can shift the functioning of the brain like that, one of the direct, measurable cause and effect outcomes is resilience. So we do cultivate these positive emotional experiences, not just to feel better, but so we can do better. We actually clear space in the brain and in the mind so that we can begin to see what our options are and make some wise choices.
Most of us are familiar with the fight or flight response. We've heard countless examples of that, the saber-toothed tiger and all that stuff from the ancient times, really. But you mentioned in the book the fight, flight, freeze, fold response. Can you talk about that a little more?
All right, so our autonomic nervous system, our nervous system, is scanning the environment for anything that might be potentially dangerous in the environment or in the people that we're around. And it automatically will activate to rev up. We go into fight, flight to take action against something that seems dangerous, or we will fold numb out, shut down, collapse. So the nervous system can rev up, it can also shut down. There are a lot of tools offered in the book, our somatic intelligence, to work with our nervous system, because the nervous system operates 24/7 unconsciously. But when we want to consciously regulate it, there are tools of breath and touch and movement and visualization that work with the physiology of the nervous system to actually shift it. So we want to bring the nervous system back into what's called the range of resilience. It's a physiological equilibrium, a safety zone within the nervous system. And from there, when we're both calm and relaxed but engaged and alert, we can actually see what needs to happen, how we need to respond. It primes the neuroplasticity of the brain to actually learn and grow. So a lot of the tools are simply to help us regulate the nervous system so we can come back into that range of resilience and act skillfully.
You have dozens of exercises in the book. Is there one that stands out as a favorite, or maybe is especially important for us to practice?
You know, the one that I usually teach first to clients and to workshop participants is called Hand on the Heart, and it's powerful enough to calm down a panic attack in less than a minute. And it's easy to learn, and then it becomes a resource for us to use anytime there's a moment of startle or distress. So it's very simple, of putting your own hand on your own heart center so you can feel the warm touch of your hand on your heart. And then to begin to breathe more softly, gently, deeply into the heart center. And to breathe in a sense of ease or goodness or safety or trust into the heart center. And then the core of the technique is to remember a moment, just one moment, when you felt safe and loved and cherished by another human being. So not the whole relationship, just one moment. It could be with a parent or a child or a good friend or a therapist or a coach. It could be with a spiritual figure, and it could be with a pet. But you just remember this one moment of feeling safe, and let the feeling wash through your body, kind of let the warm glow wash through your body, and stay there for 10 to 20 to 30 seconds so that you really get to shift the physiology. What's happening is when you breathe deeply into your heart center, you're activating the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, the calming down branch of the nervous system. When you breathe in a sense of ease or safety, you're restoring a coherent heart rate variability, which allows the body to respond to stress more flexibly. When you remember a moment of feeling safe and loved and cherished with another human being or a pet, you're activating the release of oxytocin, which is the brain's hormone of safety and trust. It is the brain's direct and immediate antidote to the stress hormone cortisol. So as soon as you activate the oxytocin, the whole body begins to calm down, the heart rate goes down, the blood pressure goes down, and you can actually come into a sense of safety. We can use a tool like that to actually be able to preempt the stress response. So when enough oxytocin is flowing, something stressful could happen, and it just goes right on by. You don't go into the stress response. So I have people practice this 5 times a day for a week, just to train the body-brain to go in that pathway. And then when something distressing happens, automatically, hand goes to the heart, you think of feeling safe with another person, and you begin to calm the body down. So a lot of what I'm trying to teach in these exercises is to do them over and over and over again, repeat, so that the pathway gets stronger in the brain. It's easier for the brain to find this resource when we've practiced it a number of times. You don't even have to think about it anymore. And then the tool is already there to help you calm down and become more resilient.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the lessons are, or the book itself is sequential. You don't want to be jumping around from chapter to chapter. You pretty much want to start at the beginning and go straight through. Is that correct?
Right. And the reason I do that is I'm trying to teach these tools of resilience the way we learn them in the first place, which is from the bottom up and the inside out. Mm-hmm. So we begin with the somatic body-based tools because that's where resilience begins. in our own body brain. So the tools of breath and touch and movement to regulate the nervous system. And then emotional intelligence so that we can actually manage the surges of emotion that are going to happen, every moment of the day, so that we can manage them and begin to see how to respond to them. Then the relational within, having a sense of self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-appreciation, that is the inner secure base of resilience, is the best protection we have against stress and trauma. And then the relational intelligence with others, so that we actually know how to be able to recruit other people to be refuges, safety and protection for us, and resources when we're facing dark times. And then the reflective intelligence, our capacities of mindfulness to be able to see what's happening, see our reactions to what's happening, step back and disentangle from our reactions, and be able to see the big picture, shift our perspective, and make wise choices. So we're going from the body brain all the way up to the higher brain and getting more and more sophisticated in how we respond to life events. By the time we get to that integration of reflective intelligence with all the other intelligences, then our whole being is able to work together and respond to whatever is difficult or challenging.
There's a question I've always wanted to ask of someone in your position, and I used to hear things like this as a kid, when my parents would say, you're taking me to my breaking point. And I always wondered, what is a breaking point? Is there a breaking point? Are there some people who don't have a breaking point? How do you feel about that?
Okay, so I would say that our breaking point is simply when our coping mechanisms get overwhelmed. We're doing fine, we're doing fine, we're doing fine, and then there's that one last thing, and we go into overwhelm. It just means we've lost our resilience temporarily. We just got tired of having to cope. Everyone will have a different breaking point at different times of their life, even different times of the day, depending on what you're dealing with and how many people you're dealing with. The point when we have that breaking point, that overwhelm, is to be able to stop, find a refuge, regroup, pull in our resources. There are many, many steps involved in that, but we all deserve a chance to fall apart and regroup and come back together again, because that's part of being human. That's part of living a human life. When the book came out, I interviewed a lot of other experts on resilience, and one of the things I kept hearing was, life is messy. Life is hard. Nobody is resilient all the time. Mm-hmm. We try to become more resilient more of the time, but all of us have times or places or occasions where we just lose it. And if we could have compassion and understanding for ourselves as human beings, that is part of being human, then that is also part of our resilience. We're not perfect. We're not going to be strong all the time. That's just not possible. And so to make room for the setback, the failure, the breaking down and crying, and then come back. And okay, I had, as my friend Phyllis said, to resettle my molecules. I had a chance to fall apart. Now I can pull it back together again. And when I do that, I'll find my resources. I'll find my strength again. And if anything, I could be even more resilient. So yes, we make room in there for being human. And that's part of how we get to be resilient.
What do you want readers to take away from the book, Resilience?
That we have not only the possibility of choice, of learning these tools and having these experiences that will make us more resilient, we can choose that, but that we have some responsibility to make those choices that will make us more resilient. I'm fond of quoting my colleague Frankie Perez, who says, how you respond to the issue is the issue. And there's another quote from James Russell Lowell where he says, mishaps are like knives that either cut us or serve us as we grasp them by the blade or by the handle. So we have a choice of how we perceive and how we respond to all these life events moment by moment. And it's just being responsible for making those choices is really what leads us to become more resilient.
And where would we find your website?
So the website is Linda Graham MFT, I'm American Family Therapist, .net. So lindagraham-mft.net. And on the website, people will find audio recordings of the exercises that are in the book. They'll find the interviews with these other experts on resilience. They'll find the archives of the weekly resources for recovering resilience that have many, many, many tools. And all of those offerings are free and easily downloadable. So it's actually a resource for people who want to learn more about resilience.
Right. The book is Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and Even Disaster, from our guest, Linda Graham. Linda, thanks again for being with us, for all your understanding, and for giving us so many ways we can boost our resilience and our sense of well-being. So come back and talk with us again, okay?
Thank you very much, John. I would love that.